Amen.
Hello again. Happy Sabbath, everyone. I know many of you I was able to see this morning for the sermon, and we get some time this afternoon to talk about health from a holistic approach, physical health and emotional health. For those of you who don't know, some of you do know, so professionally I'm a naturopathic doctor, so my training is in naturopathic and functional medicine, which is more of a holistic approach to healthcare, where we're really focusing on the whole person and really seeking to restore health from the inside out of people, right? And that's the kind of care I do. So a lot of lifestyle medicine, a lot of more non-invasive therapies, but the goal is always focusing on restoring whole person health. And so that's what I do. There's an integrative clinic in Virginia Beach called Reboot where I work. But today we're going to be talking about longevity and things that we can do in our life from a practical level that will cause our bodies to age slower and better, to cause it to have better healing inside. This is an important topic because who wants to get old? Nobody probably really wants to get old, right? Have the body age, right? And so what can we do holistically to reverse that? There's a couple of quotes here. I just thought I would open up with a couple quotes interesting from the Spirit of Prophecy. Are we getting I think a little feedback there? I can adjust my mic. We're good? So if you take a look here, a couple interesting quotes that Ellen White had to say about longevity. She said, right physical habits promote mental superiority. Intellectual power, physical strength, and longevity of body depend upon immutable laws. There is no happen so, no chance about this matter. Nature's God will not interfere to preserve men from the consequences of violating nature's laws. There's much truth in the adage, every man is the architect of his own fortune. That was found in Counsels on Diet and Food. So interesting, there are certain ways that we can live which will have consequences for or against the longevity, our mental superiority, our intellectual habits, all these different things. There's another quote that she has here. Few exceptions, with few exceptions, the patriarchs from Adam to Noah lived nearly 1,000 years. That's some longevity, right? We know when we look at Genesis, there's a lot of longevity there. Are you able to hear me? Yes. So, yes, some, maybe. Are we good? So we need more volume? Yes. Okay. We'll get just a little bit more volume here. Is that better if I talk? Can you hear me in the back better? So, okay. I'll make sure to try to project here. So, again, just a comment here from Ellen White on longevity. With few exceptions, the patriarchs from Adam to Noah lived nearly 1,000 years, but upon succeeding generations, the burden of disease and suffering continued to rest more heavily, and the length of life greatly diminished. We could see that in Scripture, right, where people lived a long time, and then they're not living as long. So rapidly had the race degenerated that by the time Christ's first advent came, he was going from every town, city, and village, and the sick were being brought to him for healing. Since that time, physical deterioration has steadily progressed, and because of the continued violations of the laws of life and nature, the years of man have been shortened so that the present generation is passing off to the grave at an earlier age than at which the antediluvians came upon the stage of active life, is what she wrote. It's interesting. You can see the correlation here between the way that people are living, the laws of life, the laws of nature, and direct consequences on their longevity. Not only has disease been transmitted from generation to generation, parents bequeath to their children their own wrong habits, perverted appetites, and corrupt passions. The disregard of the laws of life and health is astonishing. Although a knowledge of these things is readily obtained, a deplorable ignorance prevailed. This is a letter that Ellen White wrote back in 1881 called Longevity and the Habits of Life. Very interesting. So she's making a correlation here between habits and longevity, and that's true because we all know that. Now, something else we know is that chronological age doesn't equal biological age, right? We all know that every year we're going to get a year older. But that does not mean that internally the systems of our body have to continue to age at a certain degree. In fact, the speed at which our bodies age depends how we're living, our health, the structure of our internal environment, all these other factors. So what we're going to look at here are a few factors that influence aging, and then we're going to talk about 7 lifestyle areas that you can do that we all can implement to promote healthy longevity and aging. When we think about the factors which would advance biological aging, things that are going to be hard on our bodies, these are some of the big categories of things which will age us faster than we would want to than we would want to. So the first here at the top, chronic inflammation. This is a biological process when you have something causing inflammation in the body, an overactive immune system, that's going to be wearing down all of your different systems. Chronic stress, chronic sleep deprivation, obesity, lack of movement, insulin resistance, depression and social isolation, exposure to environmental toxins and things that are damaging to our systems, autoimmune conditions or a dysregulated immune system, or coexisting conditions, which would be like heart disease or diabetes, other things, many of which themselves are contributed to by these factors. So when we're thinking about aging, and we're thinking about factors that are going to cause us biologically, internally to age faster, these are different things that we would want to be attentive to and to reverse. Now, the way that we can do that, a lot of that can be done in how we're living. So we're going to get into these 7 different areas here. And this is where we're going to learn some stuff about how to live more healthfully here. Feel free to take notes, feel free to take pictures if you want. We're going to talk about diet and toxins and movement and sleep and all kind of things here. First of all, diet, anti-inflammatory diet. You know, what we put into our bodies, I tell my patients, you know, every time you eat, every bite of food that you put in your mouth is an opportunity to fuel yourselves towards health or to burden your body, making it harder to achieve health. There's really no, and what we eat will do one of those 2 things. We're either giving our body nutrients that it needs or things that are going to slow it down. When we think about food, there's going to be 5 broad areas that are going to promote inflammation in the body more than other areas. And you know, there's a lot of things that we eat that do this. So these are things that we would want to be aware of and limit, because chronic inflammation is, as I said, one of the biggest drivers of aging and longevity, of advanced aging, and virtually every disease process. Almost every disease process has inflammation. And what we eat has a dramatic impact on the kind of inflammation that we're dealing with, our immune system has to deal with. So from our diet, we got 5 big areas here of things that tend to, well, some of them always, and for many people, for most people. So the first one here, refined and added sugars, refined carbohydrates and grains. There is nothing more inflammatory to the human body, to the human immune system, than added sugars. It's amazing. When we eat pure added sugars, that upregulates all of our inflammatory processes. And it's amazing when you start reading labels, added sugar is added in everything, including healthy foods. And this is something that has occurred with the industrialization of food, that sugars are poured into our processed foods. They come under a lot of different labels, high fructose corn syrup and fructose and all kind of different things. And they are very inflammatory, because a lot of these added sugars are creating an imbalanced macronutrient profile in the food that's not natural. And our bodies have to deal with that, and the ways that it deals with it, it has to upregulate inflammatory pathways. And when we have a lot of added sugar in our foods, it's very irritating to the blood vessel walls, and our blood vessel walls travel all over our body. So we want to be limiting, without question, one of the best things. If there was one takeaway, that one of the best things you could do for overall health, for virtually every disease process and for aging, it would be to reduce your consumption of added sugars, because there's a direct correlation between added sugar consumption and almost all diseases. Refined carbohydrates are next door to that. What do I mean by refined carbohydrates? I mean when you've taken a grain, the way that God made it, when it has its protein and its bran and the fiber and all of the beautiful constituents of it, you know, quinoa or buckwheat or spelt or amaranth, and it's a natural grain, and you've stripped out the protein and the bran and the fat, and you pretty much just have starch left over, and you have white bread or white crackers or white pasta or white things, you just have starch. That is also not a natural food for the body to process that, and it's going to upregulate the inflammatory processes. So we would want to limit our consumption of the refined grains, the refined carbohydrates, and move towards more complete grains the way God made them, that have a natural balance of protein, fiber, fat, and carbs in them, which is the way grains do by very nature. So the first area would be reducing refined sugars, added sugars, and carbohydrates. The second biggest area of inflammatory foods are the kind of oils. Heavily processed oils, hydrogenated oils, trans fats, refined seed oils. These are oils which have gone under in high levels of pressure, high levels of industrialization. The molecules have changed their shape, and when they come into the body, our bodies have to deal with them. They're not natural, and they upregulate inflammation. So most processed foods are going to be produced with highly refined oils. Whether it's palm oil or vegetable oil or Crisco or a lot of canola oil is heavily refined, very inflammatory. So we want to be limiting our consumption of refined oils, certainly any of the hydrogenated oils. If you start looking at your ingredients on your foods and you're seeing trans fats, partially hydrogenated or fully hydrogenated, that's not good for your lipids, for your heart health, for your cardiovascular, or for your inflammation. The third area is going to be here, synthetic chemicals in foods. Most of this stuff is found in processed foods, what I'm talking about here. This is not, most of it's not found, this isn't found in whole foods. Synthetic chemicals, there are a lot. There are thousands of additives that are poured into the American food system, taste enhancers, artificial sugars, red, yellow, red 6 or yellow 30 or blue, these different food dyes or color. All of these are synthetic chemicals, and when it goes into our bodies have to deal with them. We have to detoxify from them. We have to process them out. Many of these things are carcinogenic. Many of these things are obesogenic. Many of these things upregulate insulin resistance. Especially, so a lot of the artificial sugars like aspartame or NutraSweet, or the things in Splenda, these are all neurotoxic. They overexcite the neurons in our brains, and they lead to damage neurologically. So we don't want to be consuming the synthetic chemicals that are poured into a lot of these foods, the colors, the taste enhancers, additives, excitotoxins. The fourth area would be gluten and dairy. For many people, well, for some people have celiac disease and it cannot tolerate gluten at all. But for most people, gluten is inflammatory to the gastrointestinal system because of how it impacts the cells of the lining in our intestines. Gluten causes little spaces to form between the proteins that hold those cells together, and we can have then some of the contents in our intestines come through the walls into our bloodstream. We call this condition intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And it's because gluten causes a reaction on these little zonulin proteins, the cells get apart, and it creates GI inflammation. So for many people, most people, and we do this with a lot of patients, I consistently see, whether people have celiac disease or not, an improvement in overall health and certainly in gastrointestinal health if there's a reduction of gluten in the diet. And for dairy also tends to upregulate a lot of inflammatory pathways in the gastrointestinal system. So as we can start to reduce our dairy consumption and gluten consumption, that is helpful for reducing inflammation. Lastly, alcohol. This isn't as big of a deal in an Adventist population, but alcohol is one of the most inflammatory things we can put into the human body. And there's really, in order to deal with it, our bodies have to deal with a lot of inflammation. So from a dietary standpoint, these are 5 things to think about that we want to start being mindful of. So what are some steps that we could do to kind of be conscious of an anti-inflammatory diet? Well, a good goal, just as a principle, to the degree we can start minimizing consumption of processed, packaged, refined foods and eating more whole foods, everything wins. Because you're getting less of the artificial sugars, less of the artificial fats, less of the artificial synthetic ingredients, less of the different things have been changed. You have better of a macronutrient profile, a balance of your proteins, fats, fibers, and carbs. So minimizing processed food consumption and eating whole foods, this is the way that humanity ate for most of human history. And it's not been until really the last 100 years, or not even that, where we now have the majority of the American diet is composed of processed, manufactured, highly refined foods, which contain a lot of things that are not real food. And yet when we put it in our bodies, we have to deal with it. So as a principle, to the degree you can start shifting away from processed and eating more whole foods in their natural state and making foods, making your own soups, making your own things where you have whole ingredients, you're putting them together, your health will win. The second here, a great rule to live by. Keep your added sugars. This is an aggressive goal, but it is a very good goal. Keep added sugar consumption under 30 grams a day, if possible. It's hard to not have consumption of added sugars, but when you start reading labels, you're going to be blown away how much sugar is in everything. 1 can of Coca-Cola is about 65 grams of added sugar. 1 Otis Spunkmeyer muffin is about 35 grams of added sugar. 1 Yoplait yogurt tends to have about 20 grams of added sugar in it. It is very easy when we can just be eating regular food and be easily getting over 200 to 300 grams of added sugar a day. If we're drinking juices and we're drinking pop and we're eating even just so Hunt's ketchup has full of high fructose corn syrup. When you start looking at ingredients, you're going to be amazed. Now, when you go look at the ingredient label, you're going to see things, fats and proteins and carbohydrates, and you're going to see a line added sugars. That's what we're talking about here. A lot of things naturally contain carbohydrates. But when you see added sugars, that means that that food was made by the addition of sugar that was not naturally in the constitution of the food itself. There's no other purpose for it other than just to have the taste in there. And so when you and then the body from an insulin response has to deal with it, which we're going to talk about next. So keeping that number under 30 grams a day is amazing for reducing inflammation, for weight management, for insulin management, for blood vessel health, for reduction of advancement to prediabetes. That's an excellent goal. Start looking at your labels. You'll be amazed at how much sugar is in foods. Limiting oils. There are good oils. We need healthy fats, but there's a lot of highly refined oils that are toxic to our bodies. The oils that would be optimal would be olive, avocado, coconut, walnut, flax, sesame, or grapeseed oil. Avocado is an amazing cooking oil. It has a very high smoke point. Olive oil is a great oil to be mixing things in. If we're using other oils, certainly any of the cheaper, highly refined oils, those are damaging, very inflammatory. These would be the oils you want to use. Buy organic if you can. If you can't, wash your produce. Anytime we buy anything, it's been exposed to pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, a lot of things that are on the surface of those grains on that produce. If it's not been washed or if it's been grown organic, then we're eating all of that. And that's going into our bodies. And those chemicals are not natural. They're toxic to other organisms in our body. We could have a whole talk, and we're going to touch on environmental toxins later. But if we're able to get organic produce, I'll share later on which ones are the best to. But if nothing else, wash your produce before you eat it. There's fruit and veggie washes. You can do vinegar soaks. It's going to pull off, at least extract some of the coating that will have some of the different toxins on it. And then consider limiting or altogether. A lot of people cut altogether, but limiting gluten and dairy. I have yet to meet a patient who doesn't feel better when those two steps are implemented. And when people start to do that, people are like, wow, I feel better, less brain fog, less bloating, many things. And then eating a lot of colors, right? So when you eat foods that have colors in them, it's because they contain phytonutrients. These are the molecules that are naturally occurring in plant foods that are health promoting, that fight disease, that fuel our cells, that reduce cancer production or cells from changing into different types of cells or blood sugar dysregulation. The phytonutrients are so important for health. And so when we're eating a diverse array of colors, we're getting all of those plant phytonutrients. So make sure your plate has colors on them. All right, that's diet from an anti-inflammatory diet. The rest of our steps aren't going to be as information heavy, but we need to just start with the diet because it's important. Similar to food, I want to talk about fasting, feeding and fasting. Everything in health has to do with balance, right? When you start studying the different systems of the body, you see there's so many systems that have been beautifully designed that you need to have in one state or another. And one of those is the state of the fed state and the fasting state. Both are very important for health. When we eat food, we're in what's called the fed state. And we're in that state for about 2 to 3 hours. And that's because we have insulin and these other hormones that are secreted, and a bunch of things are upregulated in our body. We go into pro-growth and pro-nourishing and pro-storing. A lot of things happen in our bodies that are important in the fed state. But after that, we go into the fasting state. And that is just as important for health. There's detoxification, there's elimination of waste products. When you study biochemistry, and some of you may have studied biochemistry in school, you would probably remember that virtually every biochemical reaction can go one way or another direction based on being in the fed or the fasting state. So it's very important that we have a balance. Now, historically, the way people used to eat, people used to eat kind of 3 meals a day, not a lot of eating in between. There was a healthy balance between those things. But now culturally, we are constantly in the fed state. We like to snack, we like to munch, we like to eat between meals, we like to wake up and have a sugary beverage, we like to eat late at night. Biochemically, that's putting our bodies in the fed state all the time. That's imbalanced. And that's not healthy for any measure of things, especially insulin control and weight control. So a good marker here is a couple of things. I mentioned this, the fed state, building, storing, growing, nourishing. You want to be in the fed state, certainly not more than 50% of the time, if not a little bit less. There's 24 hours in the day, a decent number of those we're sleeping, hopefully. And so we would have a good target is 10 to 12 hours max of being in the fed state. What do I mean by that? Well, if you start eating at 7 a.m., you would have a goal of being done eating by 7 p.m. max, right? If you're starting eating by, 8 a.m., 7 to 8 p.m. would be a good goal. That's going to allow your body then to enter the fasting state through the evening from, when you stop having food at 7 p.m. until the morning again. And that's allowing your body biochemically to have the time to do all of the processes it needs over here in the fasting state, and during the day you're doing the processes in the fed state. This is essential for insulin control because, like I said, insulin is the hormone that when we eat, insulin is produced. And insulin is a hormone that causes us to make new cells and to grow and including to gain weight. When we're always in the fed state, that's very, very hard to control weight because we're constantly in the state where the signals are being sent to build new cells, build new cells, build new cells. We need a balance in health. And having that balance is very important for aging between the fed state and the fasting state. So this is another good goal to have. Think about the timing of your meals. And also it's better to try to get most of your nourishment around your meals. You're eating whole foods, you're nourishing your body in your meals. Snacking, there's very few populations that snacking is highly beneficial for. It's for most people, it's better to be getting most of the nourishment around mealtime and be limiting the food consumption during meals so that you can dynamically shift between the fed and the fasting state. So another one here. So there's the first two, talking about our 7 steps of longevity here. 3, movement. You know, it's an interesting thing. Everything that God made has movement naturally. There's a natural order to movement. When you look at the cosmos, you see movement of the heavens and the stars, and that's all the way down to the atomic level. The electrons and the protons and the neutrons moving. Everything that is life is moving. All of our cells have natural movement patterns. Every single muscle in your body, every single bone in your body has natural movement patterns. And when we are moving, that is one of the most health-promoting things we can possibly do. There are few things that are more highly correlated across all populations, all ethnicities, all disease states that are more beneficial for health or that are more promoting for longevity than regular intentional movement in our life. Especially when we're talking about cardiorespiratory fitness, which we know that for longevity, for many people, a rate-limiting factor is cardiorespiratory conditions. And so, for movement, we have to move to live. Everything movement is life. And so, we really need to take an inventory of our lives and say, where are we getting movement? Now, I work with patients a lot, and I'm talking about all of these different lifestyle things all the time. And so I'll ask people, we'll go through, what do you enjoy doing? What have you done historically? What is your routine like? What is your life? What do you have access to? Some of us have the idea that, well, I got to go to the gym, and I don't like going to the gym, or I don't like lifting weights. There's many other ways to intentionally move your body than doing that. Here's just a few ideas, We can be moving at home. People can do entire workout regimens with a smart TV, a mat, and YouTube on your smart TV. You don't even need to have a gym membership anymore. It's amazing. Whether it's sports, if you're a person that likes social things, you can do group classes, whether it's walking, running, cycling, swimming. If we're talking about longevity, I would be remiss to not talk about the essential impact that movement has on health, because we know whether it's cardiovascular health, whether it's metabolic health, whether it's musculoskeletal health, whether it's any sort of neurodegenerative diseases, whether it's cognitive diseases, regular movement improves outcomes across the board for all of them. And people feel better. The first step is oftentimes the hardest step to take, right? But once you get momentum and you start getting a routine and you start to realize, wow, I feel good, it's great. Now, the best time to do it's in the morning. And this has to do with the way our melatonin and our cortisol balance. If you can get movement in the morning, that's ideal. You're setting yourself up for energy throughout the day because you're going to get an elevation in cortisol throughout the day, which is going to carry. And so, but if it doesn't work in the morning, that's okay. So take an inventory of your life and think, am I moving intentionally? People used to a lot, but now we live in a culture where we mainly sit for jobs. We have to be very conscious of this. And many of us know this, but those who make movement a regular part of their lives don't regret it. If you have a friend who works out or has a movement routine, they don't regret it. Or if you're a person like that, you know that to be true. So, move to live, for sure. All right, our fourth step here of longevity, a lifestyle step, limiting toxic exposures. I really like this one. Just because I've done a lot of study. One of the areas of naturopathic medicine, there's 7 different modality areas, one of which is environmental medicine. And we live in a world where we're exposed to a lot of things that are damaging to our bodies, whether it's from food, whether it's from radiation, whether it's from airborne things, chemical usage, from things we put on our bodies, things we breathe. There's a lot. And so if it goes on your body, if it goes in your body, if you're breathing it, your body has to process it as if you ate it. Even if you maybe didn't intentionally eat it, it is as if you ate it. It's going to get in your bloodstream, your liver is going to have to make sense of it, and if it's a damaging molecule, your body's going to have to get rid of it. Now, we have low-level exposure, all of us, by living in the industrialized world we live in, we have low level of exposure to many things that are toxic to our bodies, but when you cumulatively add all of that up, you can have a decent amount of toxic exposure. Now, there's some things we can do to limit this. Right? If we're attentive to this, and this, like I said, we could have a whole, each one of these areas could be a whole presentation on its own, but we're kind of just hitting different topics here. So how can we do, what are some thoughts here? Well, we mentioned food. I said I was going to reference this, and I'm going to talk about it now. So we've been talking about the insecticides, the fungicides, the pesticides that are sprayed very heavily on a lot of produce. And that also affects the soil composition. And so when you buy organic produce, There are regulations around the kind of chemicals that can be used on the produce. There's also regulations about the soil that food can be grown in. And there's some criteria around the soil needing to have some degree of rotation or certain nutrient reimplementation, which of course then the foods are getting those nutrients from the soil. So it is preferable if you can to get organic, but if you can't always, and I'm going to show you this here, there is this one here, there's a group called the Environmental Working Group, and they release a list every year called the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15. Have any of you ever heard of this before? The Dirty Dozen or Clean 15? A couple of you have. What they do is they essentially do an analysis to see which areas of produce have the highest concentration of residue burden from toxins and different things. And so if you can only buy organic for a few things, which of those might that be? That's the Dirty Dozen. So the list, here's the 12 foods that have the highest concentration of toxic residues. And so if you could go to the store, you would like to get these organic. Now this tends to be ones that have thinner membranes for a lot of them. You can see that. Strawberries, spinach, kale, nectarines, apples, grapes, cherries, peaches, pears, peppers, celery, and tomatoes. Many of those you would note have a pretty thin membrane on them. And so what is sprayed is going to tend to be absorbed into the actual fruit of the produce. So if you can, those would be the foods to buy organic. The Clean 15 are the ones that have the lowest amount of pesticide, insecticide, fungicide that actually gets into the food or that's used in the raising of it. Avocados, corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, sweet peas, eggplant, asparagus, broccoli, cabbage, kale, cauliflower, mushrooms, honeydew melons, and cantaloupes. As you can notice, many of those have thicker membranes, or they tend to be maybe root vegetables, or just the nature of the way it's grown. Perhaps there's maybe not as many bugs that like those plants, but for whatever reason, those have a lower toxic burden. So when you're shopping and you're saying, hey, I want to limit my exposure to all these environmental toxins that come through food, this is something to keep in mind. And this is released every year. The Environmental Working Group updates this list, and it's a good little thing. They even have little wallet cards you can print on their website if you want and put it in your wallet, and you can take it to the store with you. So that's a fun little list. But going back to food here, so I mentioned this, buy an organic washing produce here, talking about animal products without hormones. In the Adventist church, many of us do not eat meat. Some of us do eat meat. There's a difference. So if people are going to eat animal products, we want to limit animal products that have added hormones, antibiotics, growth hormones, because that makes a big difference. When you look at some of the industrially raised manufacturing plants where there's like animals that are all growing in close quarters, oftentimes they tend to be sick. Oftentimes there tends to be infections that run through those communities. And there's a big difference in the health concentration of a chicken that's in a Tyson farm that's all filled with antibiotics and growth hormones and oftentimes sick versus a chicken that's running around free range in Pungo. When you actually, the kind of nutrients, toxins, hormones that are in that, those are different things. And so if we're going to eat animal foods, we would want to be very conscious about getting free range or grass-fed or organic or hormone-free. When you go to the store, you can see that on labels and you can make informed choices because, again, if you buy it and you eat it, it's going into your body. And so what goes into the animals' bodies goes into our bodies too, right? So that's another note, how to limit toxic exposure for food. Plastics. We have a lot of plastic exposure. The world has a lot of plastic use. And plastics, many of them are very disruptive to our hormone pathways, our thyroid hormones, our sex hormones, our adrenal hormones. Now, so in general, it's good to reduce plastic use where we can, but a couple of principles. We don't want to be cooking food in plastic because if you're having hot food or hot soups or things come into contact with plastic, you're going to be pulling a lot of those molecules from the plastic into the food, and then you're going to be eating that, right? Now, there's some healthier alternatives here. You can see glass, ceramic, stoneware, stainless steel. I don't think I have it up here, but I don't know if I do or not. But since I'm talking about this, Teflon is another perfect example. Teflon's highly carcinogenic. And so now once you get the new pot and there's no Teflon, peeling off, you're getting only a little bit of it. But as you cook every single time on that Teflon, you're eating some of that Teflon. And so it's much better to be having, and then it goes in your body, and your body's got to deal with it and process it out. So when we're thinking about our cookware, we want to be having natural, minimally toxic sources of cookware. Stoneware, glassware, ceramic is great. And please don't cook in plastic and certainly Or drinking in plastic, even something like if you have one of the little Kirkland water bottles and you leave it in the car and it's on a 90-degree summer day and you come back and it's all, kind of warm, a lot of that plastic is leached in the water. And if you drink that water, you're going to be drinking all of that. And many of these plastics, between BPAs or phthalates or different, they, again, like I said, many of them are disruptive to our hormones. So part of it, and I think I have it on my next slide, especially for women, but for men too, there's a whole class of toxins which are known as xenoestrogens. And then many of them are in plastics, many of them are in fragrances. And so these are molecules, most of which are petroleum-derived molecules that have a shape that mimics estrogen. So when it gets into our body, it can bind to estrogen receptors. Now this can upregulate, this can create a condition of estrogen dominance for women, which can lead to a lot of cycle abnormalities or PMS symptoms or heavier bleeding or endometriosis. It also leads to a lot of the development of more feminine physiologic manifestations in men too, if there's an estrogen dominance. And so there are millions of xenoestrogens used in products, whether it's candles or fragrances or perfumes or Glade plugins or Febrezes or a lot of plastics. And so when we're exposed to these things and they're getting in our body, they affect our physiology. So we want to limit that. So on that note, household products. What are we cleaning with? What are we breathing in? What's getting on our skin? What are we inhaling, right? There are many options now. There's some companies that have entirely biodegradable. So that's an interesting thing. If you see a product that says it's biodegradable, that means that all of the constituents that product has been made with will naturally on their own disintegrate and degrade into nature and become part of just, there's not an adverse impact on nature. So it's a lot gentler of a source. So limiting chlorine use or like a lot of the hard cleaners, it's interesting. If you go to the store now, you can just see products that are sourced from more essential oils or more from plant-based sources or biodegradable sources. And if it's advisable to use those for our household cleaning, for things we're using at home, even just vinegar and water is heavily effective for just a lot of cleaning too, and that's very natural. And then fragrances. Synthetic fragrances are pretty damaging to health, between amazing effects, damaging thyroid, damaging adrenals, damaging ovaries, causing a lot of headaches, causing a lot of brain fog. So when you go to Bath & Body Works and you walk in there and you're just surrounded with the aroma of all of the millions of different fragrances, those are all synthetic chemicals. And so it's much better to be using essential oils, which are natural plant-derived molecules that have beautiful scents to them, than a lot of the petroleum-based synthetic fragrances, because when you bring that in, they're very inflammatory, they're endocrine disrupting, and aging to the body. Beauty products. Now this gets into, there's a lot of things we put on our bodies, especially for women, but for men too. When we put something on our body or in our hair, we absorb it, and it goes in. And there are thousands and thousands of toxins in a lot of cosmetics or colors or different hygiene products. Fortunately, there's a lot of companies now, more and more, that are making far more cleanly sourced cosmetics and body care products. And so you can do this responsibly. There are certain categories: phthalates, parabens, fragrances, the triclosans, the toluenes, a lot of metals, PEG, formaldehydes, talcone, benzenes, BHTs, BHAs, a lot of sulfates, a lot of lauric acids. There's a lot of molecules that are proven to be carcinogens, that are proven to be endocrine disrupting, that are proven to be damaging to our nervous system, and we put them on our bodies every day, many of us. So we think about that. Like a lot of people, a lot of times when we think about health, and this is, part of where, my approach is in naturopathic medicine, a lot of people don't realize how there's so many things in our life that impacts our day-to-day health, Every choice we're making, the kind of homes we're living in, the kind of food we're eating, the kind of beds we're sleeping on, the kind of cosmetics we're using, those things impact our health. And so we want to limit our toxic burden. And so we want to start shopping responsibly and taking a look and seeing, are we just having a standard off-the-counter product that has all the toxins in it, or are we choosing a company that's going to have fewer of these products? And there's many of them out there. A couple of resources. This could be, like I said, we could talk on and on about this, but a couple topics here. There's a little app. If you're into apps, you could download this. It's helpful. It's called Think Dirty. It's an app where you can scan the barcode at the store of a product, and it will bring up a whole environmental toxicity report of that product, food and body care products as well. The Environmental Working Group is an agency that they review all these things. You can go to the environmental, they're an amazing group. If you've never been to that website and you're into environmental health, ewg.org, you can go on to ewg.org and say, I want to learn about sunscreen. I want to learn about shampoo. Go to EWG, type in shampoo, you're going to get pages, all the different ones. You got your Pantenes, you got this and that, and they're going to give you a report. These are ones have these toxins, these are ones don't have toxins. You can start to choose, wow, here's some different products I can use. It's a great, great resource. All right, we got a couple more here. I know I spent a little more time on that one than I probably needed to. 3 tips left. Sleep optimization, right? It's interesting. We're talking about factors that across the board lead to advanced aging. Sleep deprivation has been linked with higher risks of, check out this list here, heart attack, stroke, atherosclerosis, inflammation, obesity, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, diabetes, autoimmunity, memory loss, neurodegenerative diseases, cognitive impairment, adrenal thyroid dysfunction, poor appetite control, anxiety, depression, suicide, and death. These are where sleep deprivation has been correlated with increased risk for all of those different things. And sadly, most of America is sleep deprived. The schedules we live in are very demanding. We're go, go, go all the time. And most of us are not getting the 7 hours of sleep that adults are recommended. So the ideal goal for adults would be 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That is the target range. What are some things we could do to optimize that? Everybody feels better if they sleep more. There's nobody in here that says, I want to sleep 3 hours a night. Everybody feels better if you get a good night of sleep, your whole day is changed for the night. And if you do that chronically all the time, your whole life is changed, right? So a few things here that can optimize the sleep environment. Now, I get a lot of patients that come and they have trouble sleeping for all kinds of different reasons. There's neurotransmitter imbalance, and there's hormonal imbalance, or there's hot flashes, or different things. There can be other physiologic conditions that can be interfering to sleep, which can be optimized and worked on. But across the board, here's a few general principles. So, avoiding eating or any stimulant exposure within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime. If we're doing that, if we're eating, if we're drinking, if we're having any exposure to stimulants within 2 to 3 hours of bed, that's going to negatively affect your circadian rhythm. And it's going to make it harder for you to move through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and REM sleep during that night. So, you want to be limiting that. Avoiding anxiety-inducing things before bed. That's kind of a no-brainer. All of us know what it's like to have a stressful conversation right before bed and you lie awake thinking about it all night, right? So that's not a good practice to have. If you are there at home and you know it's going to be heavy conversation for both of your health, table it till the morning, because it is going to be disrupting to sleep if we're doing anxiety-inducing activities right before bed. The brain responds better to an environment that is dark, has minimal light exposure, because the gland in the brain that produces melatonin is called the pineal gland, and it's very light sensitive. It's particularly sensitive to blue wavelengths of light, and so when we have exposure in our eyes to blue wavelengths of light, that's disruptive, and it suppresses the production of melatonin. So we want to be in a dark room. We want to be oftentimes electronics. I even have this here, avoiding them. Or there's many different filters now on electronics, on phones, on tablets, where you can do the nighttime filter or the blue light filter, and what you'll notice is that the color temperature becomes a lot warmer on the phone, and that's less stimulating to the pineal gland, which is going to allow the pineal gland to continue to produce melatonin, because at nighttime, your melatonin, what makes you get tired in the evening, when you start getting that first wave of I want to go to bed, your melatonin is peaking really high, and then it's supposed to come down, taper down throughout the night. And then in the morning, your cortisol is supposed to peak really high and come down during the day. Now what happens is, if your melatonin, let's say you're going to go to bed, like your body, I'm really tired, I want to go to bed, I'm feeling it. So your melatonin is coming up, your brain's telling you, but then you say, oh, well, no, I got to finish this project, and I got to do this and that, and I'm going to, not do that. And then I get my second wave, right? So what happened with your second wave of energy? Your melatonin was coming up, but after you push through it, your pineal gland stopped producing melatonin, and now it comes down again, and you're not going to get another hit till maybe a couple hours later. Your brain's going to try again, and it's going to try to release melatonin again, and you get tired again. But if you continue to do that, your ultimate level of melatonin that you get to will never reach the same height at night that it would have the first time. So if you would have gone to bed the very first time, your melatonin would have gone all the way up here and then tapered down throughout the night. But if you keep suppressing it, it might only get to here, not throughout the night. So you might sleep 7 hours from 2 a.m. to 9 a.m., but your sleep's going to be less restful, less restorative, more superficial than it would have been had you slept from 9 p.m. until, what would that be? So I guess like 4 a.m., right? So there's a difference as far as that's why I have bed earlier than later. Keeping phones at least 4 feet away from your head, turning off Wi-Fi, phone in airplane mode. Did you know that we constantly live in all these networks of these electromagnetic fields all the time, and we have our whole houses synced on these fields. It's very disruptive to the brain waves, alpha, beta, and gamma brain waves in our brain. So when you've got your phone, when your head is here and your phone is here, and it's pinging to the tower all night, first of all, that's increasing your risk of neurodegenerative diseases and brain damage. But secondly, that's disruptive to your brain patterns at night. And you're not going to have as deep and you're going to have more superficial sleep that night. Now, I have a tri-meter in my office, which is a meter that measures electromagnetic fields, and I'll sometimes measure these for patients. And you can actually have the phone right here, and you can move the phone away. Once you get about a 4 to 5 feet radius, you're picking minimal electromagnetic radiation from most phones. Now, it's ideal if you could just put it on Wi-Fi, turn off the Wi-Fi, or just put it on airplane mode. But if you need to have things on, have an alarm clock, have your computer, try to give yourself at least a 4 to 5 feet buffer. Your brain's going to have less of that exposure. Having a wind-down routine is also really helpful too, because this allows the body to, all the physiology to get in the state of rest. So have a routine. Take a bath, dim the lights, get rid of the overhead lights, put the lamps on. That's allowing your body to get better sleep. All right, 2 more tips here, 6 and 7, for aging. Stress reduction. Boy, I told you every one of these could be a whole talk in and of itself. But stress is important, right? Because we all know this. That stress kills us, right? Stress kills us mentally, it kills us spiritually, it kills us physically. And chronic stress is the worst. And when we're living under chronic stress, everything is aging in your body at an accelerated rate. And so there's a lot of things that are stressors. I spend a lot of time with my patients talking to people about stressors, what's your level of stress. But when I do that, I'm always asking a couple questions, right? Well, there's many things. You can see relationships, family, work life. We all know this. There's many things that stress can cause. So what is an approach, right, that could work? I like to kind of follow this model. First of all, there's clarity in identifying what is the stressor. Where is it coming from? A lot of people say, well, I'm just stressed, and everything in life is stress, but have never taken the time to really intentionally think through in a detailed way, what are the things in your life that are causing that stress? Now, some of us right away can name that. Well, it's this relationship. Well, it's my boss. Well, it's this. But for a lot of people, we may not be able to pinpoint it so fast. So what are the stressors? Can we clearly identify them? And then secondly, can that stressor be externally or internally modified? What do I mean by that? An external modification. Can the situation change? Right? All right, you have a bad situation with your, with your boss at work. There's something there, like you're working too many hours. There's a bad relationship. Can that dynamic change? Is there space? Is there probability to have a conversation and set a new dynamic? Right? Can you have fewer hours? I brainstorm every day with my patients talking about their stressors and saying, what are some ways this could be modified? Now, some stressors cannot change, right? Some things we cannot change externally. There are situations that are beyond our control. They can't be changed. But then can there be an internal modification? What do I mean by that? Can my response to that change, right? Because even if I can't change the situation, can I modify how I'm responding to it, how I'm thinking about it, how I'm orienting to it? If I'm oriented to something with a lot of resentment and bitterness and hatred, because for whatever reason, that's stressful, but could I orient to it differently? Could there be an internal modification? Guess what? If so, that's profoundly stress reducing, right? You win in that way. So think about that. If you're under a lot of stress, first of all, say, why? What are the things? Make the list. It's this, it's this, it's this. And then ask the questions. Is there any way? External modification. Do we need to move? Do you need to sell the thing? Do you need to quit the job? Whatever, right? Sometimes there needs to be drastic steps that are taken, and it could be worth it. Our health is worth it. But if it's beyond your control, can we change to it? And this is where the gospel and the Bible can shed a lot of clarity, right? Because the Bible is filled with instruction on navigating a world that has struggles, that has suffering, but we are called to do that in a different way than other people. To look at the examples of Paul and Silas in the prison who were singing, right? Jesus had profound things in his life that would be considered incredible stressors, right? We can see many of the martyrs, many of the apostles did. There's a lot of guidance in Scripture that can teach us as Christians about how to have internal modifications to our stressors, and that's where God can help us with this. So addressing one or both of these things can oftentimes lead to a healthy stress management. It's also very important that every day we're doing something that is calming to our nervous system and our body. It's very important. Just like I was talking earlier about the balance between the fed state and the fasting state, we have 2 states of our nervous system. You have the fight and flight state, and you have the rest and digest state. Now, neurologically, for those of you that have studied physiology, you would know that there's different nerves. There's the sympathetic nerves and the parasympathetic nerves that mediate those states. Now, a lot of things we do engage these nerves, but the things that we do that are calming engage the parasympathetic nerves. Health is found in balance, and too many people never engage the parasympathetic nerves, meaning they never do anything in the rest and digest state. It's important when we take a look at our lives, our jobs, our home, are we doing anything that's calming, that's restful, that's self-care, that's restorative? Taking a walk, going to the beach, having prayer time, Bible reading, listening to music, doing breath work, having massages, doing creative expression, sharing physical affection, writing letters, doing something creative, like anything. All of those things can be self-care, they're calming. And when we're talking about overall health and balancing and stress management, that's important because that 20 minutes, that 30 minutes a day can become your haven where your body resets, your nervous system calms down, and everything starts to just calm down in the body. That's really good. So, all right, I know we're almost at the top of the hour here. Last one, and this is where we're just going to pick up from a lot here. Aging. How could we talk about aging and not having a relationship with God? Look at this, Proverbs 10:27. The fear of the Lord prolongs life. Amen. But the years of the wicked will be short. Proverbs 9:11. For by me your days shall be multiplied, and years added to your life. Proverbs 3. My son, do not forget my law. Let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. You know, it's interesting. There was a study in 2011 that looked at 20,000 Americans, and it was determined that Christians, on average, live 4 to 9 years longer than non-Christians. And for the African American community, it was an average of 14 years longer than non-Christian African Americans. That was incredible when I saw that. You know, why is that? Why would that be that way? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, right? Improved physical health, mental health, hopefully fewer addictions, or maybe people that can break free of addictions. We know that there are statistics, of course, that show that many of these things are as prevalent in the church and outside of the church. But we also know that, many people in the church have victory over many things. And it's interesting, when you look statistically, Christians tend to live longer. We know there's studies that show Adventists do historically. We all are familiar with the Blue Zone studies that have done that. There's also been studies that have shown that regular prayer, regular church attendance, and regular fellowship with other believers have been positively correlated with longevity and increased aging. It's healthy to come to church. It's healthy to pray. It's healthy to read the Bible. That's just from a scientific standpoint. Of course, the most important thing is the peace that passes all understanding that God gives, that brings us peace and assurance in our own lives. So that's another little note here. So 7 lifestyle areas to promote longevity: anti-inflammatory diet, fasting, feeding, called intermittent fasting, daily movement of getting at least 30 movement, reducing our toxic exposure, optimizing our sleep, getting our 7 hours, reducing stress, relationship with God. Do that, and you're going to have a long, happy life. Amen. 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 So that's the first talk here.